Welcome to the Thunder and Lightning Show. Previously, in a number of videos, we have referenced Opus Dei and how their funding is influencing groups like Church Militant. And we're going to take a deeper dive into Opus Dei and at least what we know about Opus Dei. So, Brett, would you like to get us started on maybe a little bit of the history of Opus Dei and what it actually is?
Well, it's a secret.
Darn. Well, that's the show.
Thanks for watching. But what we've been able to find out from public sources is that, of course, it was founded by Saint Jose Maria Escriva, who was made a saint by John Paul II, the Great. And it started, it was made pontifical right in 1950, but started in the 30s. And it's sort of the whole thing was sort of a preview of Vatican II. It was Vatican II before Vatican II was cool. Opus Dei, now some people may be confused and think that that is, Opus Dei is the work of God. They may be confused and think that that's, chanting the Psalms like St. Benedict said. But that's not what we're talking about here, no. We're talking about getting up in the morning and going to work and the universal call to holiness, which is not a bad thing, but let's not pretend that me going to work and delivering packages is the same as a monk trying desperately psalms and desperately trying to get to heaven. It's not exactly the same. Just saying. So, Opus Dei somehow, for a Catholic organization, has really gotten themselves a whole lot of money. And they seem to thrive on secrecy. Now, here we are talking about them, so how secret could it be? But they don't, they're a bunch of clams. They don't like to talk about, they'll talk about what they want to talk about and nothing else. People who are a member of Opus Dei generally don't identify themselves as such. Because, they're proud, I guess. I don't know. But it's, and of course, a lot of people never heard of Opus Dei until the Da Vinci Code.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, and that was sort of their big famous moment was, when you saw the albino monk chasing Tom Hanks around and he wore this silice on his thigh. The Opus Dei are known for their mortification practices. Once again, not necessarily a bad thing. One should mortify the flesh. Maybe not in that particular. One should use the discipline. The discipline is a rope that you beat yourself with.
What's wrong with fasting?
Nothing. Nothing's wrong with fasting.
I think, yeah, but I do want to jump in here a little bit.
Please.
A lot of people, so what you'll see on like very secular publications, like New York Times, I think all of these different companies have either released a video or article about Opus Dei saying ultra-conservative group. And that's one thing I want to get into a little bit later. But I think with Opus Dei, you mentioned St. Jose Maria Escriva. He died in 1975, and he was canonized by Pope John Paul II in 2002. The canonization process in 1983 was when it was changed. And I think that is why, like the Opus Dei, they're more of like JP2 conservatives, but they're also, and one thing that I don't know that you mentioned was obedience. That's their big thing, is obedience to priests, bishops, cardinals, and the Pope, for sure. Never criticize any priest, bishop, or God forbid, the Pope. You cannot criticize the Pope. So I think that's...
You can't even criticize a supernumerary in the organization.
Yeah, explain to the viewers, if they don't already know, the numeraries, supernumeraries, cooperators.
Okay, there's three types of folk. A numerary is a drone in the organization. Females are often picked as numeraries to clean. That's often what they're meant to do. And they are told what to read and what not to read. They are told how to practice their religion and how not to practice their religion specifically. Supernumeraries are often priests and religious, plus certain higher-ups in the opie-dopes. And cooperators, well, tell us about cooperators.
Okay, well, on the Opus Dei website, so the question is, can non-Catholic Christians and non-Christians belong to Opus Dei? Answer: non-Catholic Christians and people of other religions cannot belong to the prelature, but they can be its cooperators if they wish. Cooperators pray for Opus Dei or help it by means of their work and donations towards the educational and social projects undertaken by the faithful of the prelatory throughout the world. At present, there are cooperators of Opus Dei who are Orthodox, Anglican, Lutheran, Jewish, Muslim, and Buddhist, as well as people who have no religion. So all of these people, all these cooperators, you can have a Buddhist praying for your ministry.
Who is he praying
You
to?
can have
Oh no.
you can have atheists praying for your ministry.
Who are they praying to? Nobody.
It's a complete farce. It's just money, and they mentioned money there, so that's exactly what it is. They want the money. They don't care about these atheists who are cooperators or whatever, saying they're sending their good vibes to the work of the Opus Dei.
Oh yes.
Getting back to Saint Jose Maria Escriva, I know that one of our friends had mentioned his take on contraception, and this is kind of a long quote from him, but I do want to read it. I hope it's important to give perspective to Jose Maria Escriva and kind of what he stands for. He says, "I could write a huge volume on the disastrous consequences that the use of these and other contraceptives brings with it, namely the breakdown of married love, unhappiness, and all that stuff. However, I do not think that it is necessary to go into this. I prefer to simply obey the Pope. If at some time he were to decide that the use of a particular medicine were licit to prevent conception, I should adapt myself to whatever he said. In following the norms established by the Pope and those of moral theology, I would examine in each case the evident dangers to which I have just referred, and I would give my advice in conscience to each individual." So he's saying blind obedience to the Pope,
More
right?
or less, even if it contradicts tradition. I mean, that's my understanding of what he said right there. Maybe you could find a separate spin on that. Maybe implicitly in there he would say, like, oh, the Pope would never say anything non-Catholic, and theologians would never say anything on Catholic. What year was that quote? I bet it was
I
from
don't know.
Humanae Vitae. It was probably from the 60s or 70s.
It may have
Well,
been.
it'd have to be.
Yeah, but so to me, I hear that and I just say that's more of the hyper-papalism, ultramontanism, papalatry, sola obediencia, that kind of stuff, where why even bother thinking? Just like, you command, I obey. What do you want me to do?
Give us your money.
All my money here. To me, that just seems... That's not... God didn't make us to be that way. Granted, it's not the job for everybody to be the moral theologian or whatever. But here's the thing. You should listen to the people that know what they're talking about. The problem is that the people who should know what they're talking about, namely the Pope and the moral theologians, have proven since Vatican II that they're not always giving you the truth. And then instead, they're kind of like listening to what the world says. What do you want, world? Oh, yeah, that's what I want too. And then they go and say, this is Catholic teaching and you should listen to it. And that's the problem with this, the obedience above all things kind of a morality.
Well, wait a minute. It's not obedience all the time. Saint Escriva did not say the new Mass. He asked for, and I believe he received, special permission to skip out on that one.
Mm-hmm.
So he sort of made some sort of prudential judgment that he wasn't going to obey that particular thing. And if he could get a Mother May I slip from the Pope, because of course he believes in that.
Yeah.
Well, the Pope can say it, then I have to do it.
Yeah.
Or if the Pope says it, then I can do it.
Yeah.
So good for him. Good for him.
So what I wanted to talk about was...
All the money we get from Opus Dei?
Well, I was getting to that.
Okay.
But, no, Damian Thompson has a few interesting quotes. I've seen them before. Getting into Father Escriva, he says that he asked Damian Thompson, here's a quote from him, "I asked Monsignor Feldsman, who was a former member of Opus Dei, how he knew that Escriva secretly tape recorded people, as he alleged. Because I helped him do it, he replied. He said Escriva, in his opinion, was in heaven, but the canonization was wrong. He was not allowed to give evidence, he added. So, I mean, that's a little bit shocking into Escriva's background.
So they didn't. So this particular guy that knew Escriva well and helped him was not allowed to testify at the canonization hearings.
He was not. It was one of the first quickie canonization hearings. There were 2 miracles. Both were testified to by Opus Dei doctors.
Well,
They were.
Yeah, nothing suspicious about that.
Not at all.
Now, also, in the canonization process, money has a lot to do with whether someone gets canonized, and I mean that's very obvious. Opus Dei notoriously has a lot of money. They influence a lot of organizations, especially American Catholic media organizations. I don't know facts. It's all secret. However, there's speculation. Now, I know Randy Engel, she's one of the journalists that does a lot of investigation into Opus Dei. She basically thinks everyone's Opus Dei, which I wonder if they, I mean, there could be a lot of truth to that. So, even Taylor Marshall started out his career in Opus Dei, but I'm going to read a list of people who actually are proven to be Opus Dei people. Not a long list because it's secret, but Scott Hahn, and I like Scott Hahn, but notice how he doesn't ever speak out against any of the corruption in the church. Yeah, that would be why. Archbishop Gomez, so good luck with him calling out brother bishops. And Bishop Robert Finn of Kansas City, and here's an interesting one. A deceased Archbishop John Myers of Newark, New Jersey. He was Archbishop of Newark in between McCarrick and Tobin. And that might explain why McCarrick didn't get investigated in Newark.
Awesome.
And then another quote by Damian Thompson. Some very influential priests in Rome have kept quiet about various scandals because Opus discourages criticism. I'm not sure if I want to speculate on Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Renzi. Oh, well.
Did he actually say that?
No.
You added that.
I don't know if I want to speculate on them.
Yeah.
Actually, I do because I just did. But no, seriously though, you see these conservative priests,
Yeah.
and that's Opus Dei also has a reputation of being conservative. They're ultra right wing. That's what the media labels them as. But really, they're Novus Ordo JP2 conservatives. Probably not a lot of Latin Mass. They're a big
I
fan.
think they do have that.
I think they're against it.
And I think this is how you get the JP2 conservatives, I think, is mostly from Opus Dei,
I
in
think
my
so,
opinion.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it, JP2, he canonized their founder.
Absolutely.
And so they feel like they owe him a lot of allegiance. And that's, I mean, that's where you got the whole JP2 generation, like movement of Novus Ordo conservatism, but the influential priests in Rome thing, that was very interesting from Damian Thompson as well, and I do speculate that Cardinal Sarah and Cardinal Renzi are at least somewhat involved.
I would definitely think Sarah more than a Rinze.
I have.
I know Sarah has done ordinations for Opus Dei, and I remember I emailed you about that.
I have speculation that Arenze is Opus Dei, and if you notice, neither of them have ever criticized Pope Francis.
No.
So it's, I think that's how it is right now. Is that the people that don't criticize Pope Francis, you don't have to say like, oh, he's a heretic or whatever. You can say, well, he said a lot of concerning things. I don't think this is Catholic or anything, but they don't even say stuff like that.
Nobody does. It's all very quiet out there.
So
It's the peace and the quiet. It's all wonderful as we careen to
Over the edge of the cliff.
pretty much.
all right. Well, let's see if we haven't. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about with Opus
I
Dei?
wanted to make a mention about why they have this reputation as being arch conservatives.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, this goes back to the 80s, the JP2 era. There was basically 2 camps in mainstream Catholicism at that time. There was the liberal wing of the Bernardines, the Mahonis, the Jesuits, and all that. And then their opponents were the JP2 Catholics, the conservatives, the Mother Angelicas, Scott Hahn's, Opus Deis. Okay, and because the Opus Deis basically had their media, and the liberals had their media, the mainstreams and National Catholic Distorter, papers like that, that's all everybody else was shut out, and that's what you saw. So, if you are a wacko liberal who reads the New York Times and National Catholic Distorter, and you look over at the mainstream church and you see, oh, it's JP2, oh, it's these arch conservative Opus Deis, and they just do whatever the Pope says. And
Ratzinger, the Rottweiler.
Ratzinger, which is actually true. That is what they did. They just did whatever the Pope said. But when they used the word like arch conservative, it really didn't mean anything other than that these people didn't want to go along with gay marriage and women priests. That's what arch conservative means. And you don't want to give communion to Protestants and all that stuff. So it was just a name. It's not actually true. But if you're in that paradigm of Father James, well, at the time it was like Cardinal Martini of Milan, again, with those other priests that I already mentioned, versus the JP2 Ratzinger crowd. Again, if that's all there is, the JP2 Ratzinger crowd seems like arch conservatives, guys stuck in the mud of the medieval church and all this. And again, going along with that is that the obedience, whatever the Pope says, the moon is made of green cheese. Well, it's made of green cheese, and we don't even need to investigate this fideism or papalism. Nowadays, with the new media, the YouTubes, the other papers, the traditionalist stuff that's out there, things like this fantastic YouTube channel, John the Son of Thunder. We can bring you that there's actually, that's more than just Democrats and Republicans. There's a whole other world out there of it's no longer JP2 Catholics and wacko liberals. There's the traditionalist movement as well. And that from there you get the true criticism of Opus Dei, that it is a strange organization that focuses mostly on money and control of people's lives, political purposes more or less. A minor element in there is the sanctification of lay people, and it's built upon the acceptance that Vatican II is great in all, like as it's written, it is absolutely great. And so we have to accept that, and whatever the Pope says is what we do. And even if we maybe personally disagree with it, we don't say anything publicly about it. And that paradigm, again, is basically dead since Pope Francis has become Pope. It's been discredited. And so Opus Dei is kind of...
Yet it moves on. It moves on like a zombie.
It is. Well,
there's a zombie church.
They're trying to stay... See, the Opus Dei is trying to stay relevant. They still have EWTN, even though it's slipping. I don't know if Barron, you would say he belongs there. Michael Voris, Church Militant, some other Scott Hahn and those people. They're trying to stay relevant, but they're really just getting swept. They're either going full lib or full trad. And Opus Dei is now, it's like splitting, because they might have all the money in the world, they might have control of media empires and whatnot, but there's nothing of substance there with respect to the faith to keep people in it. Because you're either going to accept Pachamama or you're going to reject the Pope, like in his, or maybe not reject the Pope, but reject his stupidities. And you have to go on record and say, Pachamama is idolatry and I'm not going along with it. This Pope is crazy. And I'll resist him to the face when it comes to this stuff. And so the opie-dopies are not going to do that publicly, so they're left out. Where are they? They're nowhere. They're irrelevant, invisible, like Sarah.
And they are invisible.
They invisible, useless. He wrote a book called Silence.
The Power of Silence. He's got it. Boy, is he really powerful now.
Maybe he'll come up with a book, The Power of Obedience, and then we'll know for sure that we're right.
Yeah.
But no, what Scott Hahn is definitely going trad. I know he
goes to the Latin Mass.
It's like you said, and I think you're absolutely right. The chasm is opening up. You're either trad or you're not.
Yeah.
And and I feel for the Novus Ordo people. I really do, because they need to find a way over here. Yeah. They need to find a way over here, because this thing is the Titanic.
And I don't think they have to somehow get out of the Opus Dei to make this complete jump over to traditionalism. Because there's no place, and Opus Dei is still trying to be that conservative Novus Ordo in Latin kind of deal, And again, another thing, this is a whole nother aside, but their entire focus is on the spirituality of Saint Jose Maria Escriva.
Right.
It's like as if he wrote the entire book on this. Wait a minute.
Several books.
Yeah, he has. But before this guy existed, there have been thousands of great spiritual writers and saints who have had spiritualities. So you don't need Jose Maria Escriva to be a saint. You've got hundreds of other saints who are better than him. Okay, let's just be frank. They're much, much better than him. And you can read their stuff. So you can still be holy and get out of Opus Dei. I mean, just become a Benedictine Oblate. Okay,
Yay.
Saint Benedict already invented this stuff, holiness and through with ora et labora. Saint Benedict already did this, and you don't have to give all your money away. Although it'd be nice, you could give them to your Benedictine monastery. You don't have to read all of his self-help books or whatever. And
He did read. There is one self-help book, The Holy Roll.
Yeah,
You do have to read that one.
yeah. But and you don't have to belong to this cult of sola obediencia. Yeah.
And if you're female, you don't have to clean.
Well, yeah, you don't have to pledge, and you don't have to be a secret celibate. There's a lot more we could get into. The one last thing I just wanted to say, Phil Lawler of Catholic Culture,
Yes.
he used to be Opus Dei, and he realized that he wanted to talk about corruption in the church, so he left Opus Dei.
Wow.
His wife said that she blamed the Boston abuse scandals a lot on Opus Dei, and it's because they refused to cooperate with any investigations, or they refused to report the priests who were doing these scandals. And that's a problem with sola obediencia. That's hyper-obedience, and we don't stand for it because we are the laity,
And we will not be silent.